Hello world. Good morning, namaste, Nissan Bulavinaka from Sydney, Australia on this Queen's Birthday long weekend. I am Sashi Singh and welcome once again to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. In episode 23 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point today, we will shortly meet our returnee chief guest, the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament Fiji, and the leader of the National Federation Party. In a no-holds-barred, one-on-one, must-see interview with Professor Prasad, we will discuss the NFP campaign trail, discuss whether economic management is on track or out of control in Fiji, Fiji's debt crisis and the cost of living issues, discuss the scourge of corruption in the country, talk about media and freedom of expression, the NFP partnership with the People's Alliance, and a lot more on things that affect the lives of all Fijians. All that and more with our chief guest, the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, shortly. As we begin, like always, may I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with Professor Biman Prasad with as many people as possible. To ensure that you receive instant notifications for all future programs, please like the SSTP page and follow us too. If you're joining us for the very first time, a big welcome to you, to all our regulars, our milestone followers, and to our top fans. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Welcome to the Thinking People's program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook and on YouTube. As always, my comrade in arms, we begin today's program with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, former Fiji TV journalist, Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings of the week in Fiji and in Australia. Nikhil, welcome back to SSTP and a very good morning to you. I hope you are keeping yourself nice and warm on this very cold winter's morning in Sydney.
Good morning, Sashi. Indeed, it is very cold, and hello to the viewers as well.
Well, Nikhil, let's get straight to your segment. We've got a long and a big program today with Professor Prasad. The ruling party, Fiji First, has been accused of playing racial politics to stay in power. The National Federation Party has hit hard on the subject. What have you got for us on this?
Well, Sashi, the Minister for Agriculture, Dr. Mahendra Reddy, who is known for his gaffes and sometimes controversial statements, has said that Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama was born so Fijians of Indian descent could be granted equal citizenship. He made the comments at a Hindu temple last week. The NFP leader Biman Prasad has told the Fiji Times that, I quote, "It is disgusting how government ministers go to Indo-Fijian places of worship to tell them that only Frank Bainimarama can guarantee their status as equal citizens." Sashi, given your guest is the NFP leader today, I think I can safely assume that you will bring this topic up in a bit more detail.
Absolutely, Nikhil. I intend to talk to Professor Prasad about that. So thanks for leaving it right at that point. Now, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Christopher Pride, has accused the Bainimarama government minister of attempting to interfere in a sentencing process, which he highlights is not the role of a minister, but a judicial function. The minister has responded. What's happening here, Nikhil?
It's actually always a serious issue when you talk about judiciary anywhere. Now, Rosie Akbar, who is the Minister for Women, had stated last week that she would lobby for stricter measures in every single case of domestic violence and sexual offences because it could save lives. The DPP has responded by saying the comments made by the minister is inappropriate. He's told the Fiji Times that sentencing is a judicial function and undertaken carefully by the courts in accordance with the Sentencing and Penalties Act 2009 and the relevant judicial tariffs for the offence. He went on to say that it is inappropriate for the minister, as a member of the executive branch of government, to attempt to interfere in the sentencing process, which clearly is a judicial function. The DPP further says any changes to the statutory law need to be brought before Parliament, and sentencing of a convicted person needs to be done independently by the courts, applying the Parliament's law without interference. Now, Rosie Akbar has told FBC News that the DPP has used incorrect and out of context information published in the Fiji Times and has made factually inaccurate statements about its minister. Now, clearly, there is the blame shifted to the Fiji Times, talking about shoot the messenger. The Fiji Times has, however, made it clear that the contents of an article titled Judiciary Reminded of Roles, published on Thursday, the 9th of June, were lifted directly from a speech that the minister had delivered. The Fiji Times editor-in-chief, Fred Wesley, has said the minister's claim that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution used incorrect and out of context information published in the Fiji Times, and that the Fiji Times, quote, on many instances in the past have been caught spreading misinformation as its source of information, is a serious allegation. And Fred Wesley has said the minister should be backing them up with evidence.
All right, and there has been a lot of speculation about current SODELPA member and leader of opposition, the Tui Thakau, Ratunengama Lalambalavu. We hear that another party has offered him a ticket to contest this year's general election. What's on that front?
Just a brief one on this, Sashi. What I can confirm, according to media reports, is that the People's Alliance leader, Sitiveni Rambuka, has approached the opposition leader, Ratunengama Lalambalavu, to join his party. Now, no surprises, because the Tui Thakau is Rambuka's chief. They come from the same confederacy and village, and Rambuka has confirmed that the offer has been made. However, the Tui Thakau has not responded to the request as yet. But Rambuka remains hopeful that the paramount chief will agree to contest the general election under his party banner. The Fiji Times has also reported that, according to Rambuka, the Tui Thakau has a huge Vanua following and has worked widely in Fiji in various roles, and he would be an asset to the People's Alliance party. Sashi, the former Prime Minister, also said that Ratunengama continued to have Fiji at heart, was a loyal member of the Social Democratic Liberal Party of SODELPA, and wanted to complete his term with the party before deciding anything further. So yet to see that the Tui Thakau joins the People's Alliance, but clearly there is talks about a possible move.
A watch and see move, as far as I'm concerned. We'll keep watching. And the controversy surrounding the Russian super yacht Ahmadiyya is finally over. It was costing the Fijian government over $1 million a week as the vessel remained berthed at the Lautoka wharf. Nikhil, finally, this yacht is well and truly on its way to the US.
Yes, Sashi, this was, I think, covered quite well in the Fiji Times, and that's where I've taken this out from. And it reported that public interest dictates that the super yacht Ahmadiyya sails out of Fiji waters. This is what the Supreme Court said while striking out and dismissing the yacht owner's summons for stay of execution and of proceedings pending appeal in the Supreme Court. Now, in his ruling on the application for stay, the Chief Justice said there was no error made by the Court of Appeal in holding the High Court's decision, and that after analysis of the facts and submissions found, there was nil to slim chance in the applicant satisfying the threshold of the Supreme Court Act 1998. As you've highlighted, the cost burden of the Fijian government, Sashi, the court said, and I quote, public interest therefore demands that the yacht, which has no interest in Fiji, should sail out of Fiji waters to avoid wastage of more valuable resources on it. Ahmadiyya set sail last week on its way to the US, Sashi.
All right, closer to home, after a series of meetings with world leaders abroad, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese welcomed his New Zealand counterpart, Jacinta Ardern, last week. It also appears that the relationship between France and Australia is on the mend. Please tell us more, Nikhil.
Yes, Sashi, a busy few weeks for the new Prime Minister. As you'd recall, just hours after being sworn in as PM, Albanese was on his way to Japan to attend the Quad leaders meeting with the leaders of Japan, India, and the US. He then made a trip to Indonesia to meet with the Indonesian President Joko Widodo. We then had the Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong visiting Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga in almost the same week. These visits all signal a concerted effort by this government to strengthen ties with the regional family, Sashi, and to counter the increasing footprint of China in the region. And on Friday, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern became the first foreign leader to visit Australia under this new Labor government. Ardern told the media that this visit really gives a chance to reset. In a press conference by Albanese yesterday, we also learned that Australia will pay French shipbuilder Naval Group $830 million in a development the Australian Prime Minister hopes draws a line under a scrap contract that severely damaged ties between Australia and France. This is, of course, the deal that the previous government had entered into, but later cancelled, costing Australian taxpayers almost $4 billion. Now, the settlement of this deal also negates any further legal action against the Australian government. The French President Emmanuel Macron quite famously accused Morrison of lying, and this saga really put a strain on the relationship. But with the new government in Australia, the relationship does appear to be on the mend. Albanese yesterday revealed in the same press conference that he has been invited by the French president and that he has accepted the offer to make an official visit to Paris, Sashi.
All right, and finally, some good news. The small town of Biloela in central Queensland erupted in joy on Friday as they welcomed the Nadis Lingam family, who returned after 4 years in immigration detention. Please tell us more.
Yes, Sashi, certainly scenes that will remain with me for a long time after seeing the live footage of that. But this Tamil family have become perhaps the most famous example of Australia's harsh treatment of asylum seekers. They were given 10 minutes to pack up before being removed from their home by Border Force agents in a 5 a.m. raid in March 2018. They were moved to immigration detention in Melbourne. They later were moved to different parts of the country, including Christmas Island and more recently Perth. Now, despite pleas to the Morrison government at the time, including by some of the government's own members, the family remained in detention for over 4 years. But the election of a Labor government changed it, Sashi. As one of his first official duties, the Home Affairs Minister Jim Chalmers granted the family bridging visas, allowing them to leave community detention in Perth and return to their home in Biloela. The family finally touched down in that town in central Queensland last Friday and were greeted by hundreds of friends and supporters. And if there's any hint about the future of this family, the Australian Prime Minister said in the press conference yesterday that he sees, I quote, no impediment to them now obtaining permanent visas, Sashi.
Well, Nikhil, thank you very much indeed for your contribution today. As always, very nicely presented. Have a safe and blessed Queen's birthday long weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in the next program. Have a wonderful day, Nikhil.
Thank you, Sashi. All the best.
You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live. We ask the questions that all Fijians all over the world want answers to. Please like and follow the SSTP page if you have not done so. I have an important announcement to share with our viewers. Sashi Singh's Talking Point, SSTP, recognizes that questioning, constructive arguments, and opinions are part of conversation. But posts with aggressive personal attacks, profanity, name-calling, swearing, defamatory in nature, and/or threatening will be removed immediately, and offenders will be blocked from being part of the SSTP program. Let's observe these rules and enjoy the program. I had the unfortunate task of removing 5 people yesterday. So let's be nice, let's be kind, let's argue in a constructive manner, but let's not use abusive words. I'm sure you don't use those words in your home. All right, well, it's time to meet our chief guest on SSTP, a scholar and a gentleman who really needs no introduction. The Honorable Professor Biman Prasad is a current member of Fiji's parliament and is the leader of the National Federation Party. Professor Biman Prasad, welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. It's a pleasure to welcome you back as a returnee guest, sir.
Thank you, Shashi, and my pleasure to be back on your very, very popular show. And also greetings to all those who are watching live.
Now, you last appeared on Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Sunday, 5th December 2021, in episode 3. On that day, I told you that Sashi Singh's Talking Point was by no means an established program, but if the last two programs then were anything to go by, I said to you that it seems it's here to stay. Well, sir, 20 years later, 20 episodes later, you are back, episode 23. How does it feel?
It is certainly feeling very good, Sashi, to be back. And I know I've been watching your programs. You know, it's very popular now, and I know here in Fiji a lot of people are watching. And you're providing an absolutely fantastic, platform and opportunity for many of us, to articulate the views here in Fiji, because we often do not get this kind of platform with the draconian media laws that we will be talking about soon. So thank you once again.
Pleasure is all mine. Now, you have the distinction of being the first politician to be the chief guest in this program. And today we have a lot to discuss in the program. So let's get straight to matters and let's begin our discussion for today. Well, campaigning, Professor Prasad, has started for the general elections in Fiji. How is the National Federation Party campaign going?
Well, first of all, Sashi, we have to understand that there is a law about when the official campaign can begin, or what they call a campaign period. Now, that has begun already. It started on the 26th of April. But as we know, all of us know, we don't know when the election is going to be called. Perhaps, there are only two people in this country, Frank Bainimarama and Arya Sayed Kayum, who probably know when they're going to hold the election. But we all know that legally the election could have been held anytime after 9th of July and could be held anytime until 9th of January. So we don't know exactly when the election is going to be held. But as far as the National Federation Party is concerned, as far as our work in the party goes, we are ready for an election anytime between now and when the last date has been stipulated.
All right. Now, how do you perceive the mood in the electorate?
Well, it's very clear from all the visits and meetings and activities that we are conducting at the moment. We knew this before. In fact, in the last 2 years, people have seen the way in which the Fiji First Party has conducted itself, especially when they were faced with the pandemic, the crisis, and people are now fed up with not only with the performance of this government, but for a long time, people have been fed up with the style of this government and the way in which they regard, governance and democracy as a whole. So, yes, I think the mood in the country is one of a change, and I believe that's coming.
All right, let me assure you, there's a lot of different topics that I will raise with you today. So I don't want you to preempt anything. If in the end you feel I haven't covered a subject, I will give you the opportunity of addressing that particular subject.
Sure.
So this time around, it seems that a lot more people are turning up at political meetings. I've seen videos, etc. Why do you think there is a greater interest this time around?
There are two things, Sashi, that's driving that. One, I think, as you know, in the past two elections, there was a lot of fear being created by the government and those, who were contesting elections for Fiji Fest. And I think people have been able to see through that. I don't think people are fearful anymore. And so people are interested in finding out, what's happening, what political parties are offering. And I think the overwhelming and perhaps the most important underlying reason why people are so interested in political meetings and what's happening at the political level is because they want to change. They're fed up with this government. So that's a very, very clear message that we are getting throughout the country.
So, are you trying to say that people actually come forth and discuss their concerns about aspects of their lives in these meetings that you've created, or is it a come see, come here, and go sort of attendance? Because from what
No,
you are saying, it seems that people are making their feelings known.
Sashi, I've always believed that people are not as gullible as some political parties or politicians might think. I think I have faith in our people to understand the real issues, and that is coming through very, very clearly. You go to villages, you talk to farmers, you talk to different groups, young people, men, women. They all seem to have understood the importance of governance, the importance of a style of politics that is going to deliver these services and what people need. And so people are coming with their concerns, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's rising cost of living, whether it's unemployment, whole host of issues people have, and some of them are articulated very well by many of them in those meetings, and we appreciate that.
The Fiji elections will be run under the Fiji Electoral Act of 2014. Let us now look at a couple of sections of this act. I've asked other politicians as well, and I will give you the same courtesy. Firstly, Section 114 on prohibition on vote buying. What are your views on this Section 114 of the Electoral Act?
Shashi, before I say something very specifically on that, let me just make a broad point. People have to understand that a lot of the laws, most of the decrees that were passed before the first session of Parliament, which means before the 2014 election, have been preserved in the 2013 Constitution. And many of those decrees, which later unilaterally was converted into acts in Parliament or acts of Parliament, are very, very draconian laws. And the electoral law itself, the original electoral law itself was a decree which was passed before the Parliament met after the 2014 election, and on which the election was conducted. So, these are laws that we believe should have been brought back to Parliament, should have been discussed, and appropriate changes should have been made. So a lot of the provisions in those laws, in my view, remain very, very silly. And in fact, inappropriate in the context of our, political situation, and how onerous it might be on political parties in this country. So I just wanted to begin by saying that as a rider.
All right. Your views on Section 114?
Section 114, I mean, we all understand that we need to have electoral laws, and vote buying is a law that should be appropriate. But what is happening, Sashi, with that particular law, it seems to us that these laws only apply to the opposition parties. For example, if I can give you some examples right now, the campaign period has already started. the campaign rules have kicked in. So obviously this law has now an applicability, on candidates, on political parties. But the government, which is the Fiji First Party, continues to flout these rules in the guise of government activities. For example, the Minister for Agriculture, goes and delivers to harvesters. That's fine. If people need that. Then he goes to Nambualu and distributes compost bins. Then I had the Minister for Defense and Maritime handing checks, for some projects. Now, all these should appropriately now, when the campaign rule has kicked in, should be handled by the permanent secretaries. Why are the ministers parading themselves around the country when they know that we are in a campaign period? The campaign laws have kicked in. And so that clearly, in my view, is the ministers going out there, handing stuff to the people, and we're not opposed to people getting these things, but they are doing this to influence the voters. It's a very clear-cut case of vote buying on the part of Fiji First ministers, and some of these people will be contesting elections. Sometimes, they give an impression that politicians are only on the opposition, that these guys in the government are not politicians. So that is what worries us when you look at these laws, Shashi.
I guess in a level playing field, one would have expected all political parties, well, particularly the Fiji First government, to refrain from pork barreling, to refrain from giving handouts because, as you say, the official election period, the campaigning period, has already begun. Well, those are the rules of the games that you play with in Fiji. Professor Biman, let us look at Section 116. This is a very onerous responsibility for political parties in terms of financial proof of policies. Now, in my understanding, the new requirement for manifestos in the new Section 116 4C, in very simple terms, is as follows. Any political party, candidate, or their agent or political party supporter who, as part of their campaigning, claims verbally or in writing that their party is going to do anything that will cost money must immediately put into writing 4 requirements. 1, how this commitment will raise revenue. 2, where they will get funds for this exercise. 3, how this exercise is to be carried by the various sectors and budget sector agencies. And 4, if the proposal or proposals cost more than the money that the government expects to raise from taxes, how they will meet the shortfall. It's got to do with costings. And of course, on the other side of the coin is the penalties. If someone is convicted of an offense, they can face fines of up to $50,000 or a jail term of 10 years or both. Let me ask you, what are your views on Section 116 provision?
Well, Sashi, my reaction to that, in short, that is a silly law. I mean, in your own country, in Australia and in democratic countries, political parties put out their manifesto. And of course, political parties sometimes in some context, offer the moon to the people. But that's up to the people to judge. That's up to the people to believe the promises of what the particular political party is making in their election. Now, what this government has done, what Fiji First Party as a government has done, is to make this silly law to ensure, the motivation is quite silly. In fact, it's sinister. The motivation for this law is to stop the opposition from going out and campaigning effectively, stopping political party supporters and the agents and others who want to support the party to effectively campaign, because they have put these penalties, as you said quite rightly, $50,000 fine, 10-year jail term, for any kind of promises which is not costed. Now, fundamentally, what this does, and you read out the provisions. I mean, the government put out the pre-election economic and fiscal update. This was on the 9th of May. Now, they're saying that political parties can use it to look at, revenue forecast, to look at the deficit, to look at how each sector. I mean, that is the silliest thing, the stupid requirement that this government wants opposition political party. We don't even know. And some of the figures that they put out, I mean, we don't believe a lot of the figures that this government puts out. How can a political party, based on this supplement, do its estimates? And besides, when we explain to somebody, whether it's the registrar of political parties or who decides that what we are suggesting is, who's going to assess that? I'll give you an example. A leader of a political party, put out a policy stand and said, a leader of Sodelpa, and said, we're going to cut Fiji Road Authority budget to provide free education. Now, instead of the government or whoever is supposed to look at that, the CEO of Fiji Roads Authority comes out and attacks a leader of a political party. That's not his job. And this is what this law is creating. They know it's a silly law. They can't respond to it. So they are asking the chairs of the board, the CEOs, this is the responsibility of the politicians in the Fiji Fest. So it is, the motivation, Sachi, is very, very clear. It is to sabotage, it is to restrict the opposition political parties from effectively campaigning and doing the manifesto and making the promises. We don't have an independent budget office here. For example, in Australia, if the opposition party and the party in government, puts out a manifesto, there is an independent budget office which may do the costing and leave it to the people. It's up to the people whether they want to believe that the Labour Party's manifesto in Australia in the last election was credible or not, or whether they could deliver it or not. I mean, here is a government which has his general secretary, who is an attorney general, who is a minister for economy, who is a minister for elections, putting out a law through parliament, using the majority to restrict the opposition parties. So this is a silly law, but it is a law, and political parties will have to navigate it through. We don't want to. We have to be very careful, Sashi, in this political environment. People don't understand. We have to be very, very careful about the words we use, what we say, because the penalties, as you read out yourself, is draconian. Who wants to go to jail for 10 years for making a promise, and somebody else will determine whether you did the right thing or not? I mean, you could be taken to the court, and of course the court will decide ultimately what the penalty is. But this is what this government's objective is. It's a silly law. It should have never been put out. And in fact, I would call on the government. The Attorney General and the Prime Minister. They probably have another session, I suspect. Now they will have a budget. They should repeal this act, repeal this provision, in the law, because it is silly, it's onerous, it just doesn't make any sense.
Honorable Professor Prasad, with all due respect to you, I think that's wishful thinking. But let's move on. It is wishful thinking. Look, you talk about draconian laws. I mean, how's this for a measure? The minister responsible for elections, Mr. Qayyum, says that every dollar collected by a candidate or a political party during a fundraiser must be accounted for, and the money needs to be kept in separate bank accounts. What do you think of such accountability being put on political parties? I mean, let's move this a step further. He has said that if a party sells roti parcels, sells glasses of juices, you must account for that.
Shashi, we are not against accountability, transparency of political parties. Every country, every democratic country has laws about how political parties should be governed, how they should disclose their funding. But this is, again, getting sillier and sillier. And the motivation, again, is very important for our people to understand. The Fiji First Party, their way of collecting funds is very different. They have this cabal of businessmen, supporters. Many of them, hold positions on the boards, are government appointees. One of them, is sits on various boards, but also in the last election was a member of the Fiji First Selection Committee. And their style of fundraising is, you cobble up a group of businessmen, and we saw from the disclosure, people who donated money to Fiji First Party are the same people, and you can go through that list and actually work out very, very clearly who these people are and what is the motivation and how they have donated to the Fiji First Party. Whereas other parties who are not in government, smaller parties, they go through the traditional approach in raising funds. They have dinners, they have, katis, they sell roti parcels, as you said.
Yes.
Now, at the end of the day, you're just making it too onerous for political parties and those who want to support political parties. These laws are also such designed to create fear in the minds of the people, in the ability of the people to donate to political parties in an open and a free manner. So again, these are very, very silly laws that the Fiji First Party, and the Fiji First government has brought, and the motivation is really to strangle the opposition political parties, whether it's to do with fundraising, whether it's to do with manifesto, whether it's to do with campaigning.
Have you ever seen or heard of the Fiji First Party declaring their costing?
Sorry?
Have you ever seen or heard of the Fiji First Party declaring their costings?
With respect to the political party or the...
Respect to projects, respect to, looking back at that section 116, it's to do with costings. Campaigning has started. They're on the road giving harvesters, you name it. Yeah. But have you ever heard or seen them declare their costings for any projects, for example?
Well, this law, Sashi, wasn't there in the 2018 election. But I know what they will do. For example, if we are going to have another budget, and if the election is going to be held after the budget, and the financial year ends on the 31st of July, the new financial year starts on the 1st of August. So essentially, the government will have to bring a budget at the end of June or in July, debated and passed. Now, I can tell you what they will do in that budget before the election. So their manifesto would actually be the budget. They don't have to declare anyone. They will have the financial statements. They will have the estimates. They can allocate and provide an estimate of whatever they want, based on their own projections of revenue, expenditure, loan, and they will use it to campaign, and they will brag about the projects, they will boast of, they did that before 2018 election. One good example was in the budget, there was an announcement that there will be a new airport that would be built in Sayanga. There was some allocation for initial study. Some people started buying land there. They said, oh, government is going to build an airport in Sayanga. Now, they think, they use these amateur tricks. And we understand what they're trying to do. So if they have a budget, they don't have to worry about. In the last election, their manifesto was the last. In fact, I think it was just a few days before the election, and there was this big advertisement in the Fiji Sun. That was the manifesto. Nobody had a time to actually talk about the manifesto. Whereas we, NFP, we had our manifesto out there. We defended it. We talked about it. We let people criticize our manifesto. Many, Fiji First Party lied about some of the things that we said, that we were going to do, and they did it after when they got into government themselves. So the point is, Sashi, that this is a government which is a party which is in government, trying to use these amateurish tricks, election tricks. But let me tell them, the people have now understood their tricks. It is not going to work. And we are telling the people as well.
Very quickly, how many roti parcels have you sold?
Well, we haven't had any roti parcels. Sachi, we went through a big forensic audit, by the elections office, and we had to, with respect to some of the fundraising dinners that we had before 2018 election. So we are following the laws very, very carefully. We don't like these laws. We think many of them are silly laws, but the fact is that we have to follow these laws. The laws are there, and we are going to fight this election within those laws and make sure that everyone in the party, follows those laws.
And referring to that audit, you've come through that audit without any issues?
Oh yeah, that was some time back.
Okay.
Shashi. Yeah.
All right. Well, let me now shift the discussion towards your attack this week on the Fiji Revenue and Customs Service. You said this week that there was a need for an immediate independent investigation to be launched into the operations of the FRCS over what you said was the failure of their information technology, including its VAT collection system. Now, what was the reason for this statement, this attack by you?
Well, I won't put it as an attack on the people who work for FRCS or the organization itself, Sashi. What I said in that statement was based on the representations that have been made to me as the leader of the National Federation Party, from accountants, from businesses, as to the preparedness of FRCS before the announcement on VAT rate changes was made in the revised budget by the Minister for Economy. So we used to have a flat rate of 9%. In the revised budget, some of the basic food items were rated 0, and VAT on some items were increased to 15. So there are 3 categories. And what businesses are saying is that the system has not been fixed yet to have those 3 different rates of VAT, although FRCS has said that they have given more time, there will be no penalties, that's fine. But we know that a lot of the reforms that were made in FRCS, and many people were made redundant. And so the question we are asking is, how can the Minister for Economy go into Parliament and announce a budget and says these are the tax measures that we're going to change, and the tax office is not ready? We appreciate. We support the digitization, the online, submission of returns. In fact, I'm also told that the corporate tax, which was supposed to submission, which was supposed to go online, has not been done. So what we are saying is we've had these reforms. We're hearing these issues, and so we're basically asking FRCS to look at this preparedness. And in fact, the buck stops with him. He should have known whether FRCS, as minister responsible for the organization, was prepared for this. So that's all I said, Sashi.
You also said that the FRCS system is dysfunctional. Now, is it really dysfunctional?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the business people are concerned and the accountants are concerned, and they've cited these two examples, that
Right.
it is not functional as it was put out and as businesses are required to do. So what I'm saying is the preparedness when the budget was announced was not there.
This does have an impact on the business community. What sort of impact?
Well, I mean, it raises, transaction cost. They have to have accountants, and we know that a lot of businesses in this country know that our cost of doing business. I mean, we used to have this World Bank ease of doing business index, of course that's gone now, but year on year out, there was the rating that we got in terms of the ease of doing business was very bad. So the transaction costs have always been high, and this is going to add further to the ability of the businesses to contain those transaction costs, and that's why some of them are raising these issues.
Now, is this another arm of government services that needs an overhaul? What do you think?
Well, let me just make a general comment about government, commercial companies, statutory organizations. And we know this, Sachi. We know that many of these organizations have people who are appointed by the government, who serve not just the government, but serve the Fiji First Party as well. And I think there's been a lot of interference that we have seen and we've known, and CEOs and board chairmen, they have to defer to the ministers concerned in a way that we feel have been cases of interference, and the influence that government has on some of these institutions raises a lot of questions, about the way in which they do things. Of course, there are organizations like FRCS, which report directly to which are responsible to the Minister for Economy. So the Minister of Economy, that's fine with me. But there are other independent, organizations as well, which we need to understand have to operate independently and provide independent advice to government, as well as, if needed, to the opposition.
Have a short break, have a drink of water. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest today is the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Please like, follow and share the SSTP page if you can. Professor Biman, let us now move on to another subject that made headlines in Fiji this past week. I am referring, of course, to what many believe to be the dumbass comments made by Agriculture Minister Dr. Mahendra Reddy. While speaking at the Wairuku Gangamma Temple in Rakiraki Saturday before last, it has been reported that Dr. Reddy told devotees that, and I quote, Mr. Bainimarama had to be born to give Fijians of Indian descent equal citizenship status. He said that the PM asked him to make this statement. Now, you said that Reddy's statement that Bainimarama asked him to relay this message is extremely serious. Why?
Well, very good question, Sashi. There are two things in that statement that I made. The first one, of course, is we suspected, we've always suspected that there are Fiji First ministers and supporters because we experienced some of these during the 2018 election, where a lot of fear was being generated, especially amongst the Indo-Fijian community. There were fake news, for example, just before the election that, if Biman and Rambuka or Sodalpa form the government, they will take away Diwali. So these were sort of fear being generated during 2018 election. Now, what Mahendra Reddy did on that day was kind of emotional blackmail, to a group of people, devotees who were there, basically saying to them, look, without saying, openly that, they should vote for him, basically telling them that I'm here with Bainimarama's message that you people have equal rights. You people are only got equal rights in 2013 because of Mr. Bainimarama. And he said, in fact, Mr. Bainimarama was born. And on top of that, Shashi, he also said that that morning he spoke to the Prime Minister. Now, the question that we've asked the Prime Minister is whether the Prime Minister said something like that. What sort of message did he want Dr. Mahendra Reddy to go and deliver to the devotees in Vairuku? So we've had no answers from Mr. Bainimarama, nor have we heard anything from Mahendra Reddy. But what I want to tell the people that these sort of tactics were used. We are told in the last, and I gave you some examples of how there were people who were trying to create fear in the minds of the people. So it's quite abhorrent. It's also insulting to our forefathers. People who struggled in this country. Not only just the Gurmit days, but after Gurmit days, and who fought for equality and justice in this country. To be told that suddenly, after 2013 constitution, everybody in this country, especially Indo-Fijians, have equal rights. What a load of crap and nonsense from a minister in a government.
Do we have a case where the Fiji First government ministers are so blind to common sense that they will follow the directives of their prime minister, albeit at their own peril? I mean, what are your thoughts? Look at it. Excuse me for 1 second. Pardon me. He is Dr. Mahendra Reddy, academic, educated. Why would someone follow so blindly?
Well, on this particular incident, Shashi, I'm not sure whether the Prime Minister actually gave him that message. So, it's up to the Prime Minister to clarify that. But you're absolutely right. For Mahendra Reddy to go into a temple and say something like that is not only silly, it just shows lack of common sense and perhaps, desperation, because I think they know that they don't have the support anymore. And so instead of talking about real issues, outside of these religious organizations, I was, Sashi, last night I went to a Lok Geet competition. It was in honor of, raising funds for somebody, for kidney dialysis. Mm-hmm. And, it was kind of a cultural program. I spoke there. I didn't, I just talked about, why it was important to help people. Now, mm-hmm. These guys are going there and saying these things because their motivation is to create fear into the minds of the people so that they can keep on voting them. So
it's also a motivational preaching of racial politics, isn't it?
Exactly. It's like, as I said, it's kind of emotional blackmail to say to a group of devotees in a temple, look, you are only here, you only have your equal rights after 2013. Therefore, you should be grateful to Mr. Bainimarama or the Fiji First Party, or to the 2013 constitution that they imposed on the people of Fiji, that you have equal rights. That's the message that he's trying to give. And as I said, it's just abhorrent and silly of the men to actually go and do that. And Shashi, we should expect more of this, and I hope that the Prime Minister will come out and condemn that. They haven't done that. He hasn't responded. So, is he condoning that kind of campaign? Is the Attorney General, the General Secretary of the Fiji First Party, condoning this kind of campaign in temples, in religious places of worship? These are the questions that I want to ask.
Now, do you think that religious institutions such as temples or churches should be the venue for political grandstanding of any sort, for any sort of political statements? Shouldn't it be a place of worship?
Well, Shachi, I won't say that politicians should not go to places of worship. I'm a Hindu. I go to Hindu temples. I get invited very often, to Hindu temples. I go to churches as well, when I get the invitation. So the point is, it's not about whether politicians should grace religious places. By all means, you go to places where you please. I mean, there shouldn't be any restriction.
No. I meant.
I'm coming to that point. But to
Yes.
go there and threaten a religious group or a group of people and use that occasion to create fear and to campaign for votes, that is not on. I mean, that should not be tolerated.
All right, let's move to discuss economic management, whether it's under good management or whether it's out of control, whether it's managed efficiently. Now, Prime Minister Voringambani Marama said in a statement recently that his government had managed the Fiji economy better than any other government. You called it a bad joke. What are your views on the Prime Minister's statement?
Well, Shashi, indeed, it was a bad joke because every statistics, every evidence that we have in front of us, and I'll just give you some examples. This is a report which was commissioned by ADB. It's called Policy Paper November 2021, Fiji Country Classification Report. And in that report, it says very clearly that the Fiji's poverty rate has been rising even before the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Then it goes on to say that we, with modest economic growth rates, averaging 3.1% from 2015 to 2019. And then it goes on further to say that between 2010 and 2020, the average growth was 3.3%. The ADB says it was a modest growth. And Fiji First Party bragged about unprecedented growth. By Nimrama, boom. Now, that's not true. And if you look at what happened between 2015 to 2019, Shashi, if you look at the amount of borrowing, this government was only borrowing for politics. There is borrowing for good economic intervention, good economic investment, but there is borrowing for politics. Now, this Fiji First government, between 2015 and 2018, was borrowing for politics because they were worried about the 2018 election. The amount of expenditure that went through that period, shows that the government was more concerned about showing what it was doing to the in terms of spending money. And that growth, even with that kind of spending, the average growth remained 3.1% between 2015 and 2019. The ADB report also says that the foreign investment was modest, in that period as well. I said this in Parliament, and I want to repeat this, Shashi, again.
Go
That
ahead.
I have looked at the budget. I've been in Parliament since 2014, and I've looked at all the budgets from 2015 right up to 2020 very, very carefully. Now, in my estimate, I said this in Parliament, in my estimate, between 2015 and 2020, on average, about $500 million a year has been wasted through pilferage, mismanagement, corruption in some cases. And of course, the government says, where is your evidence? I'm saying to them, don't ask me for that evidence. If you don't believe that, have an independent audit, have an independent inquiry into the expenditure during those 6 years. Imagine in those 6 years, a total of $3 billion. Imagine what we could have done with the $3 billion, if it was used properly, if we had invested in sectors where we would have created more stability, more diversification of the economy. Government put all his eggs in one basket. The agriculture sector was neglected. It's only after pandemic that they've started talking about agriculture, but there are a lot of issues. So the record, the economic management, the economic record of this government, and some of the figures that Shashi they put out, is also questionable, because what happened to the Bureau of Statistics CEO and what happened to the poverty report and how it was condemned by the government, we can't believe much of what is coming from government sources in terms of data, in terms of statistics, in terms of the estimates or the forecast.
Right.
We can't believe that. But even with these reports, where international organizations are saying very clearly, they're also saying that the IMF actually said very clearly that we, even before COVID, we were almost in debt stress. So that's the record of the Fiji First government, in terms of the economic management over the last 6 years.
Let us turn the clock to pre-COVID-19 times. How did you see Fiji's economy prior to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, the economy, Shashi, if you look at the growth rate in 2019, in fact, the economy had already contracted before the COVID pandemic hit us. In 2019, we had negative 0.4% growth. In other words, the economy had contracted. So we were seeing the signs of stress in the economy even before COVID-19 pandemic. And that culminated from the failed policies from 2015 that I have seen, and I've been in Parliament, in terms of where government's focus was. So, yes, they spent a lot of money, but what is there to show? Did we reduce poverty? Did we improve our medical services? Did we improve our quality of education? Did we improve our infrastructure? These are important questions that one needs to ask. And the answer is no. Answer is no. And then we got hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And when it hit us, we had no leg to stand on. So basically, we relied on our partners. We got all our vaccines, donated by our international partners, particularly Australia and New Zealand. We got budget support to the tune of more than $300 million, direct budget support to government. We sold EFL for $400 million. $200 million, of course, went back to FNPF because they had a share there, and $200 million went to government. We borrowed $200 million from the Japanese government. We borrowed from ADB, World Bank, and we are still borrowing because we did not have any real fiscal space. In other words, budget space, because we were spending like drunks in a nightclub, as I once said in Parliament. But at least the drunks in the nightclub use their own money. This is a government using the taxpayers' money and spending like drunks in a nightclub. And look where we are.
I will come back to discuss the debt crisis in Fiji,
Sure.
using those figures you've said. In terms of economic management, I've heard you say that they've borrowed for political means. We've just discussed the economics of the country pre-COVID. Let me ask you, I mean, I know we're not out of the woods yet in terms of a post-COVID era. How would you say the economic management of Fiji is being handled during these days, during this time? We're still not out of the woods yet as far as COVID is concerned.
You're absolutely right, Sashi. We are not out of the woods yet. We all hope that our tourism will pick up, but we all know what's happening in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, Australia just recently announced a rise in the interest rate. That is going to have an impact on mortgage repayment for a lot of people in Australia, which of course would mean reduction in disposable income or income that people have in their hands, which could have an impact on people's holidays, and of course which could, so the transmission mechanism will work, and it is going to affect Fiji and other countries as well, and particularly for us because bulk of our tourists, Australia is the largest source of our tourists. And if Australian economy, people's income is being squeezed in those countries. So we have to understand that we are not out of the woods yet. We people still like Fiji. We would like Australians, to come to Fiji, and everybody else. I think Fiji remains a beautiful, holiday destination. So yes, we are hoping that, but I think the government is again, still thinking about putting all the eggs in one basket. I mean, they're talking about agriculture, some area which has been neglected. The sugar industry was basically led to die. From 3.2 million tons in 2006 to about 1.4, 1.3 million tons of cane. They had an opportunity to rebuild the Reki mill. They didn't. So the policies that they adopted, was not sustainable. I mean, we need a much more diversified economy. And there's a report, Sachi, on by the International Finance Corporation on the bottlenecks in agriculture. These things should have been identified long ago. But so the point is that the government right now has really very little idea because the style of economic management was dictatorial. What we need is a change in the style of economic management. And we are going to offer that new style, and we can talk about that, what's our vision, what we will do, in terms of managing the economy, the style of managing the economy. What has happened is that, just to give you a precursor, what has happened in this country is a group or a cabal which has basically captured the economic policy making agenda in this country, and that's been a huge problem, and that's why we have not been able to think broadly, inclusively, and get people together to create this confidence in a direction which will create a sustainable economy.
We will discuss your visions soon. Now, staying on that economic management path, you stated that economic management is out of control, that the government is borrowing and spending to get re-elected. You also said that the government has not invested for the future in three most critical sectors for the growth of Fiji's economy. Those three sectors being education, health, and infrastructure. You described the economic management as, and I quote, "It's toxic, bullying leadership style, holds back our ability to work together to make Fiji better. I will discuss health separately shortly. Firstly, I'll let you speak about the government not investing in those critical sectors. What did you mean by this, Biman?
Well, let me start with education, Shashi.
Yes.
The government has, bragged about free education. Yes, I think people in this country appreciate. I mean, we always had free education up to a level. Form 4, we used to have scholarships. We used to have different categories of scholarships. So it was not as if people were not getting into the university, people were not being trained. We had a very good apprenticeship scheme. So we were able to train people. Of course, government brought tails and said, okay, everybody right up to Form 7 will have free education. That's laudable. That's a good thing, and people appreciate that. But if you look at what has happened within the education system, we may have provided access. Fiji's access to education was always good. It's even better now. More people are going into the university. More people are in the schools. That was always the case. But if you look at what has happened in terms of the reforms in the last 15 years, all sorts of things have happened in the education sector. From exams to no exams, from announcements to have laptops to not having laptops. And what we've been saying in the last 6 years is that, hang on, let's have an education commission. We talked about this in 2014. We talked about this in 2018. And we said, let's look at how these reforms have impacted not only on access to education, but also the quality of education and the kind of skills that we need. I mean, this report just came out in May 2022, Shashi. This is the World Bank Group, the International Finance Corporation, and it says very clearly that Fiji suffers from a shortage of skilled workers. Now, that's a very damning, and sad indictment of the kind of education policies or training policies that this government has adopted. And we are going to have that as a very, very serious issue in this country. In fact, the shortage of skills and shortage of good people will become a binding constraint to our economic prosperity in the future if we do not invest, if we do not change course in terms of what we are doing. The government set up, for example, technical colleges. I had warned them in Parliament that we used to have the FNTC. They changed that. They took it to the Fiji National University, which was probably not a bad thing. The vice chancellor at that time, Dr. Ganesh Chan, had a good vision. He wanted to create the technical aspects. But this government, when it came into power in 2014, went on a rampage with reforms, set up technical colleges, put in millions of dollars, and the whole thing has collapsed now. The whole technical colleges have collapsed. It's lying idle. And there's a group of people who are now setting up a Pacific Polytech, trying to revive that, but that's not government. These are individuals, organizations. So the quality of education is something that we need to relook at. Things like planning in education. I mean, I'm a chairman of a primary school, Sashi, and I know in the urban areas, the numbers in the rural areas are declining. Okay, we don't need to build too many schools in the rural areas, but a lot of people have moved in the urban areas, and the staff-student ratio, teacher-student ratio in some schools is between 40 to 50. Teachers are finding it difficult to actually teach properly because there's so many students in a classroom. What kind of investment has this government made, in terms of building new schools in the urban areas, or building more classrooms? Where is the planning? Where is the evaluation? That's why we are saying that the government has not invested properly in the education sector and the skill sector. What's happening in Australia and New Zealand, Sachi, now? I mean, there's a huge shortage of skills, and people are living. And I said this in Parliament in 2020. I said, when the borders open, there will be an exodus of people, out of this country, skilled people. What are we doing about it? So the problems that we had, the lack of investment has suddenly now been exposed. The COVID pandemic and what happened subsequently and what's happening in our neighbors has exposed the fault lines, the poor, policies and the poor investment in the education sector.
You just mentioned COVID, so let me raise the subject of health and COVID-19 management in Fiji. Do you think the government was ready for the pandemic? You touched on that briefly a little while ago, but a direct question, do you think the government was ready?
The government, of course, was not ready in terms of the state of our health facilities. If I can say this, Sashi, it's not so much an exaggeration. It's based on also some of the reports so it's not only us. Often government rubbishes. Oh, these are politicians talking about it. They sometimes think they're not politicians themselves. But I think the state of our health services is the worst ever in the history of this country. And I can tell you this. I grew up in a rural setup. I grew up in a area where there was a health center. When you used to visit the health center, not only the building, not only the white stones and flowers, and the ambience, around those medical facilities. In the 70s, in the 80s, if you go around the country now, Sashi, and I visited, you look at the state of disrepair. We've been talking about the CWM hospital. For many sessions of parliament, we took pictures of doors of grass growing on the hospitals. We've been talking about the machines not working. The Minister for Health has lied many times in Parliament. When we talked about angio machine not working, it was not working for 2 years or 3 years. And when we raised that issue, one good Samaritan, Dr. Kapadia from Brisbane, then donated an angio machine. I don't know whether it's operation. So what is happening is this government has presided, the Bainimarama government and Fiji First government has presided over the worst state of our health services in this country. And this is not exaggeration. It's only people who go to the hospital when they become sick. Apart from the medical facilities, Sashi, the primary health interventions, the rise in the number of non-communicable diseases, with the world's diabetes capital. I mean, these are facts that are staring in our faces, and this government keeps bragging about how well they have done. I'm sure you're going to talk to me about the public-private partnership, but we'll come to that later.
You're preempting everything, Professor Prasad. Give me an opportunity to ask you some questions as well.
Yeah.
Look, staying on COVID, unfortunately for Fiji, and I stand to be corrected on the numbers, some 800 odd people have died as a result of the pandemic. Currently, I just read yesterday, there are some 130 odd active COVID cases in Fiji. My question to you is Fiji currently ready for another onslaught of the pandemic should it re-emerge in terms of having adequate vaccines and personal protective equipment?
Shashi, first of all, I think more than 1,000 people have died directly or indirectly through COVID. And I think the government's initial handling of the crisis was very poor. The way in which the decisions were made led to an outbreak, and so many people died as a result of that poor planning and poor lack of appreciation of when the appropriate intervention should have taken place, when the lockdown should have taken place. So the initial management by this government was very, very poor. But subsequently, we received a lot of help from Australia and New Zealand, not only in terms of medical consumables, but also technical support, vaccine support, and we were able to bring the situation under control. Right now, I think there is experience. I think there are people in the Ministry of Health, particularly the Permanent Secretary for Health. I have confidence in those people. If they are allowed the independence, allowed the resources to manage. If we have another onslaught of the crisis, I'm sure we'll be able to handle it. But as I said, the initial handling by this government and they were not seen anywhere. When the pandemic hit us, it was Dr. Fong, who was out there, talking to the people and explaining to them what needs to be done.
I found that most amazing because here in Australia, we had our premiers in each of the state handling the press conferences. On the federal level, we had former Prime Minister Scott Morrison addressing the nation. I found that very strange. Now, you mentioned the CWM hospital. What is the state of health facilities in Fiji? I mean, you mentioned CWM hospital. I'll also mention, for example, the Lautoka hospital. Why have things gone so bad?
Well, it's simply, Sashi, because they did not invest in the infrastructure. I mean, imagine in 15 years, we can't fix and run or buy an angiogram machine, which probably cost, I'm told, $1 million. And the amount of, as I said earlier, the amount of wastage that this government has allowed, in the economic management, you compare that and compare what sort of budget would be needed to fix this. It's mind-boggling. It just shows lack of planning, lack of appropriate intervention, and allowing the people who have the expertise and the skills and the resources to do the work. I think part of the problem with this government, Sachi, has been that the civil service has been in a bind. I mean, under this constitution, I mean, we can talk about this, but I could go on and on. The civil service is kind of working as an arm of the Fiji First Party government, rather than an independent, civil service providing independent planning, advice on resources and what needs to be done. It seems to us that everything has been politicized, and the civil servants and those who are there do not stick their neck out to ask for these things in a way that I know used to be done in the past, in a proper democratic, independent civil service environment. So appropriate investment and intervention has not been made into the health services, especially in the availability of equipment, training and personnel, so that we could have a lot of diagnostics here in the hospitals.
It just absolutely amazes me. It's mind-boggling that after 15 years of being in government, the government hasn't seen it fit to invest in its people, to invest in top quality health infrastructure. Isn't it a case of having good hospital services, health services, creates healthy mind, healthy people to bring productivity into a nation. I mean, I just find that absolutely mind boggling. Now, the government has also outsourced the running of medical services, such as the Bar Hospital, for instance, to Aspen Medical under a public private partnership. Professor Biman, what is the status of Aspen's medical functions in Fiji currently? And do you think this model can work in Fiji?
Well, Sashi, that's a very good question. As I said, I've spoken about that in Parliament. I've written about the whole public-private partnership concept. In terms of health services delivery in Fiji, and we raised a lot of questions, and we were right to raise those questions. And since the announcement in 2018, and since of course, they say, all right, we've had 2 years of COVID, but that probably was a good time, those 2 years to test, whatever, the partnership that was there. We are now being told, I mean, Bar Hospital, I'm told, is operating now, but we've had a lot of complaints with respect to the services, with respect to the equipment, and what's happening there. Lotoka Hospital, we were told that we will begin open heart surgeries in May. I don't know whether it's happening there or not. I tried to find out. We are told that the equipment has not arrived. But having said all those details, I still think that that particular, public-private partnership, and of course, the FNPF is a major player in that. The money is going to come from FNPF, and we have raised questions to FNPF and to government to come out clearly as to how and when ASPEN and FNPF, partnership will start delivering the kind of services that were being promised. So there are still a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns that obviously needs to be clarified. And we know the history of public-private partnership in places like Australia. I mean, I know in some states, in New South Wales and others, governments did enter into public-private partnership and eventually found that it didn't work. So government had to retake some of those facilities. So these are warning bells that we sounded, when the government announced this, and we are still not satisfied with the answers that we've been provided in Parliament and outside Parliament, and so therefore there are serious questions that remain.
Now, what do you think are the reasons for the current government outsourcing medical supplies? Does Fiji not have the expertise to effectively run the hospital and other associated medical services?
One of the problems with this government, Shashi, is when the problem becomes too big, then it's a very reactive government. So because the state of health services, state of the infrastructure had declined, to a level where people have been complaining about it in a very, very serious way, and we have had evidence of that presented to Parliament and outside of Parliament. This government thinks that they can find something as a quick fix, and so this public-private partnership, I think, came as a quick fix. I don't think it has been thought through very carefully. I'm still asking questions about the investment by FNPF and how FNPF is going to make sure that this investment with ASPEN and in those hospitals is going to not only provide services to our people in an effective and an efficient way, but also ensure that the returns to the members of the FNPF are maintained and not eroded in any way.
Have a break, Professor Prasad. Have a drink of water. You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, And our chief guest this afternoon is the Honorable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends if you can. Don't forget to like and follow the SSTP page as well. Let me now stay with the economy theme and touch on the Reserve Bank of Fiji. The Reserve Bank of Fiji has said that the domestic economy continues to show signs of improvement as international travel restrictions ease. In the first 4 months of this year, 95,586 tourists arrived in Fiji, mainly from the main source market of Australia, followed by the United States and New Zealand. How reliable a forecast is this? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have really no issues with that forecast. I think everyone is expecting tourist numbers to increase, and so it's not something which is surprising. The forecast itself is not surprising. It's expected that when tourist numbers increase and recover, we would get people back into employment. There will be, of course, an economy which will be generated, and so that forecast is not surprising. How sustainable it is going to be, and what else we would be able to do between now and the next 1 or 2 years or 3 years, in terms of diversifying our economy, in terms of streamlining our processes, our laws, and our investment environment, so that we can attract investment back into the country, and what kind of strategies we would put in place to ensure that we have skilled workers available.
I'll come to that.
These are questions that remain in our minds, and I don't think government has any answers to that at the moment.
All right. Well, you don't have any issues with those figures. Reserve Bank has also said that performance in other sectors remain mixed, but broadly positive compared to a year ago. Let me share with you some statistics. In the same period, gold output declined and pine wood supply was around 60% lower annually. That resulted in a decline in wood chip production. Given the volatility that the world has seen regarding the pandemic, do you think it is safe and sound to make projections of such nature based on the travel industry?
As I said, Shashi, those projections based on travel industry is not surprising, and it's really a no-brainer, in terms of that's expected. But what is going to define the recovery for us in the next 6 months to a year is not just the tourist numbers, which we also feel, as I said to you earlier, that if interest rates rise in Australia, if mortgage repayments increase in Australia, if the amount of disposable income that people have, or amount of income they take home, if there is a decline, that obviously will have an impact on the number of tourists, plus also the amount of remittances that we get from countries like Australia, New Zealand, and others. So you're right to ask that question. I don't think we should again put all eggs in one basket. This is what this government has been doing over the last 5 or 6 years. What we need to do is look at our strategy, in agriculture, in other industries, and see where we have the competitive advantage, see where our investment should be geared, see where we can attract investment. Because, after the pandemic, the whole global economic environment is different. We could be heading for a global recession. The IMF and the World Bank have already forecasted a lower world economic growth. So all that is going to have an impact on the way we do things. And I don't think this government has a planning office. I don't think it has the ability to bring people together, to harness their skills, to their energies, their ideas, to put up a proper strategy for economic recovery, for us to have a sustainable economic growth in the next 3 or 4 years.
I beg to differ. I don't agree with you that it's a no-brainer. Look, the reason I asked that question, whether it is safe and sound to make projections based on travel industry, you mentioned interest rates. Now, here in Australia, the interest rate has gone up by half a percentage point, and that is already creating an impact in terms of loans and people having to tighten their belts somewhere along the way. My thought process is that if there's going to be continued interest rises in countries like Australia, New Zealand, US, last night I was looking, their interest rate is about 8.7 or 8%. My thought process is it's going to have an impact on traveling. People will have to tighten their budget. That is why I raised that question, whether it is safe and sound to make projections based on the travel industry.
I think we're on the same page. When I said no brainer, I meant, coming from the Reserve Bank.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's quite obvious. It's quite obvious that anybody in the Reserve Bank would say that, okay, we're going to have tourists coming back. But you're absolutely right. And I said that projection is based on many assumptions.
Yes.
And the assumption clearly is that the tourist numbers will continue to flow in, and that you'll keep on recovering. But as you said quite rightly, and I also alluded to that if the interest rate rises in Australia, which has already, the mortgage payments would have increased, people's income would be squeezed. That will have an impact on the outflow of tourists from Australia, which will also mean that numbers could be affected for those coming to Fiji. So yes, I mean you and that's why I said that you got to build a strategy which is beyond the tourism industry and beyond tourist numbers.
Yes,
that is precisely what this government didn't do in the last 6 or 7 years. They put all the eggs in one basket. They kept talking about tourism and they forgot about other sectors. And that is the real problem. And what we're seeing today is a result of that bad economic thinking and policy making under this government over the last 6 or 7 years. And before.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that point. Now, I'd like you to explain something. You're an economist first and a politician second. I'd like you to explain something for the benefit of our viewers. The latest economic review by the Reserve Bank of Fiji said that food prices rose by 6.9% in April, and annual headline inflation rose to 4.7% for the month. Therefore, higher imported food and energy prices continue to keep inflation elevated. What does this mean for the people in simple terms, Professor Prasad?
Well, in very simple terms, I think Sashi, people are already understanding that. People are already reeling under the high cost of living, and in particular, high cost of food. So that data or that figure itself is an indication that people are struggling to put food on the table. And especially those in the lower income category would be finding it very, very difficult.
Okay. Now, the Reserve Bank has said that foreign reserves set at $3.02 billion as of 31st of May this year. What does this mean in comparison to the $9 billion of debts the country currently has? And I must add another question here. Why is the government so gung-ho about its foreign reserves? I mean, I've heard the Minister for Economy singing praise that Fiji has good foreign reserves, unlike Sri Lanka. There's two questions in there, Professor Prasad.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think people have to understand what foreign reserve means and what is debt. Foreign reserve, Sasi, essentially is the amount of reserves in foreign currency that a country has, and the way it's interpreted is equivalent to so many months of imports. Which means that if you have a particular level of reserve, that's the amount. Sorry, excuse me. Amount of foreign imports you can buy with the reserve, and how you build reserves is when you receive income from exports. But look at our situation. Why we might still have a healthy foreign reserve, of about $3 billion. In 2020, Shashi, we received $652 million in remittances. In 2021, we received $842 million in remittances. So in 2 years, almost a total of $1.5 billion in remittances, which adds to our foreign reserve. We sold EFL for $400 million. That money came into the country to this Japanese company. That adds to our foreign reserve. We got budget support from Australia and New Zealand. That money comes into the country. We took loans from the Japanese government, $200 million. So our foreign reserves, remained to adequate levels and probably healthy because of these reasons. And the government, I've never heard of them talking about the amount of remittances we're getting. The first quarter this year, we got more than 300 million. And if you multiply that by 4 quarters, if the trend continues, hopefully, people from Australia, New Zealand, and others continue to send the money. We are looking at, about $1.2 billion in remittances in 2022. So, that's not being explained. And in fact, I want to use this show to thank all our people, in all these countries around the world, who are sending money to their families and friends. And I know during the COVID pandemic, there was this huge, outpouring of help and support from our people in those countries. And I want to take this opportunity to thank them. It not only helped their families, but it helped the economy as well. The multiplier effect of those remittances, in terms of keeping, grocery shops, supermarkets, these are economic activities that were generated, and in some ways, that kept us going. So you got to understand, the difference between foreign reserves and the debt. Of course, the debt that we accumulated, the borrowings that we did in those 2 years, also adds to the foreign reserve because the money is coming into the country.
Be it debts.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come back to the debt crisis in a moment. You just touched on remittances, and obviously to April this year, $303.1 million, correctly said by you. Now, if you look at the trend, which has just started with interest rate rises, we've just discussed that a moment ago. If that trend continues overseas, do you think remittances will be impacted if there's a growing interest rate overseas? People here will have to tighten their belts. Perhaps decisions will have to be made as to what kind, or rather how much of remittances are sent back home.
Shashi, that's entirely correct. I think if the economic situation in those countries, if the income potential or the reduction in the income, the household or the take-home income goes down for families and friends, who would ideally like to send as much money as they could to their friends and families here in Fiji, obviously there will be a reduction. I think what is also happening, as I said to you earlier, given the situation in Australia and New Zealand with respect to the labor market and the shortages in skills, I think there will be an exodus of people leaving the country. So it's a paradox. I mean, on one hand, we could be saying, and I can see the government here, they think, oh, they're doing something great, for our people. You see ministers, talking about seasonal labor mobility and all that. That's fine. I mean, our people would like to go there and income, because there is no potential here, there is no job here, and so some remittances could still continue to come, and so the decline there may be compensated a little bit by those who are going out of Fiji now. But in the long run, we don't want to become a remittance economy, because it is not going to be sustainable in the long term. And for us, it's ironical that we want Australia and New Zealand. We thank them for taking our labor, but we also want them to understand that we need workers here in this country as well. For us to have a sustainable, diversified economy, we need to have our people, trained here as well. And that's why investment in education, at all levels, especially in the tertiary sector, in the technical areas, is very, very important for us to ensure that we have a sustainable economy.
Why is the government so gung-ho about its foreign reserves?
Well, I mean, that's the only good news that they can share. So they find a good news, and they think that's going to make them look good. But they don't go out there and tell the people that how these reserves have been maintained, and what does that mean, and how our people are being helped, not by government, but by people, their families and friends outside in a big way. So this is a government which is always concerned about their PR, how they look, whether they look good or bad. And so any good news they have, they propagate it, and they have their mouthpieces, who put that out, in a very effective way.
I would now like to discuss Fiji's debt crisis with you. Just recently, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has expressed concerns about Fiji's high level of debt and has been advising the Fijian government about a fiscal consolidation plan in the medium term to create space so Fiji can withstand shocks better in the future. What did you think about the concerns expressed by the IMF?
Yeah. I think it's good that IMF has finally come out and said it in a much more clearer and perhaps direct language than what they used to do in the past. Of course, IMF does it in a very diplomatic way, but some of us knew long before this warning by the IMF that the way in which the government was going on a spending and a borrowing spree, that they will be adding this debt burden, in a very short period of time, and that's what has happened. So when the COVID pandemic hit, and in fact, this report itself, Sashi, I'll just read this. It talks about debt sustainability. It says, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, Fiji's public debt to GDP ratio was higher than other small island development states and had been steadily rising from 43% in 2014 to 48% of GDP in 2019, driven by sustained fiscal deficits coupled with major natural disaster events requiring large reconstruction. So, okay, we can talk about Cyclone Winston, reconstruction, but as I said to you earlier, the way in which this government has managed its expenditure, its priorities, has led us to a situation where, when we were hit by the crisis, we didn't have any space. When they talk about fiscal space, Sashi, what it means is that your debt level or your borrowing should be at a particular level where if you have an emergency, you could borrow more and still be able to maintain your debt within a range which is sustainable, which means you can earn enough revenue and continue to pay your debt.
Mm-hmm.
That warning was always there. And so now the IMF, obviously after the COVID pandemic, and the borrowing that Fiji had to undertake sounds a very, very important warning. And they are right. We obviously need that fiscal consolidation. And my gripe with this government is that the wastage that has taken place under this government. Ayaz Sayed Khadim says, "Oh, we will borrow to look after our people." By all means. But what were you doing before? Why are we in this situation where we didn't have that space, to be able to look after our people when we needed it? So that's not a very good excuse, for a statement for a minister for economy to make when we have this debate about, what's happening to our debt levels.
Well, talking about the Minister for Economy, he talks about what he terms smart borrowing. Look, there's borrowing, which in very simple term means that you borrow and you have to pay it back eventually with interest. But if I may ask you, what is smart borrowing? What is your analysis of this concept of smart borrowing?
Well, in my economic literature, and after teaching economics for many years, I can't remember using this term, smart borrowing, to justify and tell my students, how you can continue to borrow just because, you are engaging in some kind of a smart borrowing strategy. I think what he means by smart borrowing, Sashi, is the fact that you're able to negotiate concessional loans. So if I take a loan from you, I say, my friend, I'm going to borrow $50,000 from you, but can you give me 10 years? In 10 years I'm not going to pay you anything. It's only after 10 years that I will start paying you back with probably a small interest rate. Instead of 5%, you might say, okay, Biman, you just pay me 1%, but you start paying me. That is the IMF, the World Bank. They do this because they know that our situation is very precarious. Our economic situation is very precarious. We've been hit by the pandemic. We were in a worse situation even before pandemic. So these are ways in which they're trying to help Fiji. It's not some kind of smart economic policy agenda that suddenly this government has in its arsenal of economic management. It is simply a situation where the international agencies, lending agencies, we're not individuals. It's a country. It's about a people. They know that our people are going to suffer if the World Bank, doesn't approve additional loan. Despite knowing the fact that we are in a difficult situation, to help our people, particularly in terms of our social protection policies. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're doing it. It's not this government, suddenly has some smart borrowing ideas. It's because our situation is not good, and that's why our international partners and donors are trying to help us by giving that concession.
All right, let me ask you a very, very blunt question, if I may.
Sure.
Is Fiji in dire straits regarding the debt of some, $9 billion?
Well, I wouldn't say dire strait, in terms of, the country itself. I think if you look at the debt portfolio, a lot of our debt is domestic debt. A lot of debt is from FNPF, and then we have external debt. The debt itself is alarming. It's high. I mean, somebody said to me, "Are we worse than Sri Lanka?" And I said, on one indicator, Sashi, we are worse than Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's total debt is about 50 billion US, roughly about 100 billion Fijian dollars, and the population is about 22 million. And you divide that by the population, per capita debt would be about 4,500 Fijian. Whereas if you look at if our debt reaches 9 billion by the end of this year, and you look at our population of 900,000, you're looking at roughly about $10,000 per capita debt. In other words, every man, woman, child will have a debt burden of $10,000. So on that indicator, we're probably worse than Sri Lanka.
Nicely said, nicely analyzed, because these are things that people don't get to hear of when members of parliament, ministers make wild statements, and they seem to get away with it. And unfortunately, uh, media does not analyze these things and bring it to the people. Let's move to another subject which breaks many hearts. We've discussed economic management. We've discussed the impact of economy pre-COVID, post-COVID. We've discussed the health sector and the debt crisis. I would now like to discuss the poverty level in Fiji. Last time I spoke to you in December, poverty levels were set to be close to 30%. Economist Dr. Nilesh Gounder appeared on SSTP as well, and he put down the poverty level to as high a figure of close to 50%. Lo and behold, the World Bank has recently downgraded the poverty level to just over 24%. The World Bank has revised figures to show a downward trend. Firstly, let me ask you, Professor Prasad, what are your views on the downward trend announced by the World Bank?
Well, I did issue a statement on that, Sashi, and we asked a number of questions to the World Bank. And we also asked why this downward revision was undertaken without reproducing the whole poverty report. And so, what would be the impact of this reduction on other analytics or analysis in that poverty report? Of course, the World Bank has said that they do not wish to comment further, and the government is running with this 24.4% or just over 24% poverty rate and saying, look, we didn't do that bad. But if you look at the original poverty report, Sashi, which said 29.9%, almost 30%, in that report, whether you're looking at the methodology, whether it's consumption based methodology or income based methodology, the fact of the matter is, or the reality of the matter, as they say, is that report itself, said that about 15 to 20% of the people were on the margins of the poverty line, vulnerable. They could fall into the poverty trap or below the poverty line. Poverty line, Sachi, for our viewers, is the level of income, whether it's weekly or yearly or monthly, that is set up to say that if your income is below that amount per week, then you are in poverty. Now, even if you take this down or revised figure by the World Bank, 24%, and you take that 15 to 20%, and if you look at after COVID, this was before COVID, 15 to 20% were vulnerable before COVID. Imagine the number that would have fallen below poverty line. If you take that 20%, even if you add another 10%, so even with this 24%, you are still looking at close to about 50% of the people living in poverty or struggling to put food on the table. Now the Prime Minister goes, on radio station and says, politicians are lying about the poverty rate. That is the report. It's not a lie. And we, Sashi, you go and talk to people out there in the community, the NGOs, people who are helping. The Prime Minister needs to understand that. So my estimate is, even with this revised World Bank poverty figure, we could be looking at close to 50% of the people struggling to make ends meet.
Wow. Now, you talk about the reality on the ground. You surely have a first-hand account, because I've seen videos recently where you and Mr. Sitiveni Rambuka have been taken on a poverty tour in Lautoka by Good Samaritan Alan Lockington. What did you see on the ground level? How bad are things?
Shashi, first of all, Alan Lockington is a kind of individual that you see present in our community, in our society, in every city, every district. Then you have NGOs like, Friend, for example. There are community organizations. Last night, as I said, I was part of this group. This is a small NGO, trying to raise funds for people for their medical treatment. So there is this whole, energy, and this whole, compassion that exists in our communities, in NGOs, in people. And unfortunately, this government has not harnessed those energy, those skills, those NGOs. In fact, they've gone on the other side and attacked, people who are doing this. Friend, I'm sure they wouldn't have been very unhappy to see me and Sitiveni Rambuka visiting all these poor people that he was helping, with Alan Lockington, because they would see as a political stunt. And when they do that as ministers, they think they are not politicians. But the important message that we got, and we knew it, is that there are people who are really struggling to put food on the table, to make ends meet. And we can't just talk about this figure or that figure. We know what happened after COVID. We know it's a no-brainer that so many people lost jobs, so many people lost income. And we need to harness all these people together. And this government has not been doing that. What they will do between now and the election, of course, is to play this vote buying gimmick and pretend that they are out there really helping the people. They are not. And people know that, and people are telling them.
Let us now discuss the cost of living in Fiji. Rising prices on staple grocery items, increasing fuel costs and unemployment, etc., all contribute to an economic picture of doom and gloom. Let me ask you, how bad is the situation in Fiji, and is it salvageable?
I think the situation is bad, Sashi. If you're talking about the rise in prices, especially the rise in food prices, and obviously government in the last revised budget reduced VAT on basic food items, something that we had proposed in the 2018 election, because we felt that at that time it was appropriate to do that, and that would allow people to save, allow people to make ends meet in a way that would be sustainable. That policy, of course, was ridiculed, by government, saying that we were going to pile up debt, because we're not going to get the tax revenue. They did this in the last revised budget. They basically copied the whole policy that we had, but that came when the prices were already very high. So while it may have given small amounts of relief to the people, the bulk of the prices of those items have remained high. And the other thing that they did, Sashi, when initially after the COVID crisis, the fuel prices went down. You'd remember.
Yes.
And when it went down, this government put a 20 cents liter tax on the fuel.
What was the logic behind that? What was the logic behind that?
I can't still understand the logic, because what I said was, here we are going through a crisis. this is an opportunity for our people to save some money, by paying a lower cost for fuel, and you want to take that away? They did that. So after the prices started going up, then he tried to reduce the 20 cents tax, but the prices are still going up. So he is not looking at other options, options such as looking at the duty itself on fuel, whether there is a potential for reducing that further. And so what has happened is, it's not so much just the increase in prices, it's also the reduction in income. In fact, this government never worried about the income. When I suggested, a living wage is a wage at which a rate at which people can make the living. In other words, live above the poverty line. When we suggested, a minimum wage, phased out over a period of time of $5, Ayaz Sayed Qayyum and his team in the Fiji first went on a rampage. They colluded with the employers. They went into garment factories. They went into companies to warn workers that they would lose jobs, if they. In New Zealand, during COVID, they raised the minimum wage because they knew that people's income is going to be affected, prices are going to go up. Now, they've come back to the whole thing and saying, we want to raise minimum wages. That's fine. But the prices have escalated even further. So if you look at globally, Sashi, what governments have tried to do is, they've used different strategies, cash and semi-cash, reduction in consumption taxes, price freeze, price subsidies, other revenue measures. And so we haven't seen a very clear, well-planned strategy by this government to deal with the rise in the cost of living. And people are struggling. What we expect to see in the budget, of course, will be another election gimmick, where they will not come up with a clear strategy to cushion the impact on the poor, but it'll be an election gimmick, election budget, trying to say that everything is hunky-dory. That's how they plan to do it. That's my prediction. I may be wrong.
Okay, now, is it not true that sometime in 2018, you were arguing for a reduction in VAT, and the Minister for Economy laughed this off? He rubbished your suggestion, and then what happened?
Well, that's entirely correct. Sashi, the problem with the Fiji First Party in the 2018 election was they really had no ideas. So when NFP put out this very, very clear, well thought out economic policy agenda, which would have promoted economic growth, which would have led to diversification in the economy, which would have raised people's income, which would have kept the cost of living at a particular level where people would have had some savings. And that was in 2018. That you do that in a good time. They were bragging about good economic times, but they didn't want to do all that. So now they're going back to what they thought was a bad policy agenda is now become a good policy agenda. I mean, we are happy that they copied some of our ideas, but again, they can't even copy well. They don't have strategies beyond those copycat, games, and in terms of policies. One other thing, Sachi, while we are on this, maybe I'll bring it up later.
All right. Now, you would have probably seen Professor Wadan Narsi appear on SSTP recently. Professor Narsi made a specific point to say that when the government reduced the FNPF contribution of employers, it was akin to stealing millions of dollars from individual workers. The government's decision affected the workers of Fiji. It is the workers that ultimately suffered. Now, Biman, what would you like to say about Professor Wadanarsi's observations?
I think Professor Narsi Shashi was spot on. I think he laid it down so well, and I think a lot of people in this country were not aware what happened, because it didn't get the kind of traction in the media as well. What the government did, and I could never understand the logic behind that. You have a crisis. So what they did, first of all, they asked the employees to reduce their contribution from 8 to 5%. The total contribution for an employee's account that was going in before they brought this was 18%. So 18 cents a dollar was going into your FNPF account.
FNPF.
10% from the employers, 8% from the employees. Government passed a law to say employees will only send 5%, 5 cents to the account and keep the 3 cents. And for employers, their contribution will be reduced from 10 to 5%. So essentially what the workers of this country did, Sachi, was to help the employers.
Yes.
And help themselves by reducing their own service. So in effect, what Professor Narsi has said is that, and he is absolutely right to say that millions of dollars were siphoned off from the employees' funds to the employers, and the employees also reduced their own contribution. Now that's a very, very serious and sad indictment or sad thing that this government has done. And in fact, it's a very bad joke that they've played on the workers of this country, because what that means is the savings at the age of 50, our retirement age, especially for the civil servants in this country, is 55 years. I mean, if you say that to people in Australia, they will be alarmed. But that means that at the end of their retirement, they will have less money in their FNPF. Now that that should have never been done. That should have never been done. I don't think any other country did that. I'm not sure whether they did that in Australia.
No, here in Australia, no superannuation contribution was stuffed around with, either pre-COVID, during COVID, or post-COVID. I mean, therefore, I put to you that Fiji government's decision to reduce the FNPF contribution of employers actually contributed to the suffering of employees in Fiji. That's how I look at it. Now, I say to you, that's not a smart way of managing the economy, is it?
No. I mean, it's if the government felt that it had to take money from the workers to give it to the employers, doesn't make sense. I mean, it was the government's responsibility to ensure that the employers, got the assistance that they needed, if some of them needed, and of course some of them needed the assistance. There is no doubt about that. But to take the money from the workers and also asking the workers to reduce their own contribution to look after themselves, in times of crisis. That's not how you manage the crisis and manage the economy, and the pension fund in particular, which the government uses to borrow quite frequently.
Yes, from the FNPF. Was there ever any coverage of this part in the news media?
Well, I remember raising this in Parliament, Sachi, but sometimes I think during the budget, this is a government which sneaks in bills and changes to legislations in a way that the opposition in Parliament gets caught off guard. Sometimes we don't have the time to articulate, everything that we need to, unlike, the platform that you are providing us, where we are able to talk about this more freely and extensively.
So you don't remember that the media covered this extensively in Fiji?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
How
I don't
sad,
think
how sad, because it is the employees who ultimately got screwed.
I
Now,
think
let's move on. Yeah.
I think Fiji Times published an article by Wadan Narsi, opinion piece. So
Yes, that I
yeah,
know.
I
Yeah.
think that was, yeah.
All right, let's move on. A government minister recently said that, quote, rising food prices will have little effect on you and your family if you are willing to make adjustments. End of quote. Another dumbass comment by the same minister, I think. Now, do you think this is an insensitive statement given what the population is going through in terms of hardship?
I mean, it is absolutely insensitive. You know, the minister should understand that people are already making adjustments. They're making adjustments. They're struggling to put food on the table. Now, to add salt to the injury, you were saying, oh, if you are adjusting your expenditure, you'll be okay. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, the problem with this government and some of these ministers is that they are out of touch with the reality. They assume that, like themselves, everybody is okay. I mean, that's the only thing I can say. I mean, it might be a very cynical statement to make, but that's what it means.
All right, have a drink of water. Let me say to you that in the event there's a change of government and the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party do end up forming government, can you assure our viewers that your joint parliamentary team will follow this mantra? And that mantra I'm giving to you is make sure brain is engaged before opening mouth. Make sure brain is engaged before opening mouth. I say that because we have too much of foot and mouth disease in some of the ministers of the current government. Um, what say you?
Well, Sashi, I think that's a very good statement to make. I mean, we as politicians, as ministers, we're there to save people. We're there to listen to people. People have put us there, and we don't go there to look after ourselves or to tell people that they should manage, even when we know that they can't. So yes, I think we any government, any minister will have to be very, very sensitive to the plight of the people, and in this situation it was clearly not. And one minister, of course, said in parliament that we are making it as if everybody is in poverty. He said the situation is not as bad as that. I mean,
Yes.
what kind of insensitive statement is that? We are not making up stories. I mean, when we go to the people, we talk to the people. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable talking to the ministers, but they talk to the opposition as well. So very, very insensitive statements from some of those ministers, and people will
Well,
remember that.
well, it seems that in some cases they are so far removed from reality that they cannot see things right in front of their noses. Now, Professor Prasad, I want to discuss something from the past that may not be too comfortable. Will you allow me to proceed, sir?
Sure, sure.
All right, let's address this so that you may put paid to this once and for all.
Mm,
I was sent a video earlier this week, and I
mm,
believe the video is doing the rounds.
yeah.
And you had said in the video, and I quote, we have asked you not to vote for coup makers or those who have been involved in past coups because the message it sends out is that it cannot be done again and again and gotten away with when you put them in power legally through the ballot box. People have told us that they have to vote for stability, but that it is not stability. It is blatant intimidation that is without guarantee. It is not how you run a country. Firstly, do you remember saying this? When was this stated?
That is correct, Sashi, and that was in 2014, and that was said in the context where the Fiji First Party and Bainimarama was talking about stability, and that the Fiji First Party, which was a continuation of the military coup from 2006, was going to provide stability. But that statement is not inconsistent with the long-held position of the National Federation Party right from 1987, and people will remember that the 1987 coup led to the removal of the National Federation Party Labour coalition government. It was a NFP FLP coalition government. The NFP leader at that time was the Deputy Prime Minister to the Prime Minister, Dr. Timothy Vivandra. The NFP leader later, Justice Jairam Reddy, was the Attorney General. So, and NFP was strongly against that coup. We were strongly against the 2000 coup when the People's Coalition government members were taken as hostages. NFP was at the forefront of condemning that coup. We have condemned the 2006 coup, and the National Federation Party has never participated in a coup government or refused to participate in a coup government. With Mr. Rambuka, there is a history. He did the coup in May 1987. The interim government took over, interim government led by Ratu Mara took over in December 1987, ran for 5 years, put up a 1990 constitution, which was a racist constitution, which we all condemned. And on that election, on that constitution, there was an election that was held in 1992. And in that election, there was the SBT, NFP, and the Labour Party. The NFP won 14 seats, the Labour Party won 13 seats. SBT, led by Rambuka, did not make the numbers outright to form a government. And at that point, it was the leader of the Labour Party, Mahendra Pal Chaudhry, who supported the SBT and Mr. Rambuka to become Prime Minister. So Rambuka became Prime Minister with the support of Mr. Chaudhry and his Labour Party. In 1993, when the budget for 1994 was being debated, that government fell. The opposition parties and some from SBT voted against the budget, and the budget fell. Mr. Rambuka took the country back to elections in 1994, and in that election, NFP won 20 seats, Labour Party won only 7 seats. SBT, led by Rambuka, came with a bigger majority. And from 1994, then Jairam Reddy worked with Sitiveni Rambuka, because NFP's policy in this election was we fighting this election to go to parliament to change the constitution. Labour Party had actually said and lied to the people in 1992 that we will boycott. After winning, we will boycott. But not only they did not boycott, they went and supported Rambuka to become Prime Minister. But also, Mr. Chaudhry was negotiating with Bhutan Roka, who had won seats, to become the leader of the opposition because the NFP Labour was 13-14. So NFP had a history of working with Sitiveni Rambuka from 1994 right up to 1997, when the new constitution was promulgated. And we went into election in 1999. There was a pre-election coalition. We had constituencies. There was a preferential system. NFP and SBT shared preferences. Like other parties, they shared their preferences. And NFP and SBT lost. And that was history. In 2000, NFP was at the forefront to condemn the 2000 coup. And the military commander at that time was Mr. Frank Bainimarama. Then you come to 2006, Sashi. So we have a history of working with Sitiveni Rambuka. So my statement in 2014 is not inconsistent with our opposition to coups. We will never support a military coup. We never have and we never will. In 2006, when the SDL and the Labour Party, they were in coalition. There were 9 Labour Party ministers in that multi-party government which was provided for in the 97 Constitution. So the government was formed, it was working. And Biman Prasad did the coup in 2006 on the pretext that there was, corruption and so forth and so on. This is what, military leaders do, this is what they say when they do a coup. But the most surprising that the people must remember, and for Mr. Chaudhary to say that we are going in bed with Mr. Rambuka, I know he went he's talking about that, but let me remind him that in 2006, when the coup happened, the NFP was at the forefront of condemning that coup. The Labour Party wasn't. Mr. Chaudhary, as the leader of the Labour Party, Shashi, joined the Biman Prasad government and served as finance minister for 2 years.
Okay. I'll stop you there because I want to concentrate on the question that I asked you.
Yeah.
And at this stage, I don't want to bring Mr. Chaudhary and the Labour Party. Now, so are those the reasons why the change of mind in terms of the alliance between the National Federation Party and the People's Alliance Party?
Yeah, because we had a history of working with Mr. Rambuka. Okay. And the 1990 Constitution was a very racist constitution. And it was the leadership of Jairam Reddy and Mr. Rambuka that led to the changes to that constitution and the promulgation of the 1997 Constitution. And so we have a history of working with him. Our position, in terms of opposition to coups, is rock solid. That's always been our position and will be our position in the future. And we hope that we will forge a style of government and create a political environment in this country that will never see another coup again.
Now, there are many that say that you are following Mr. Jairam Reddy's legacy. And the last time around, this was a total disaster for the alliance. What are your perceptions this time around?
Well, 99 was a very different political environment. The electoral system was different. The demographic makeup of the country was different. This is a new system of electoral process itself. And people must remember that alliance, that coalition was not rejected outright by everyone. In fact, NFP still secured more than 30% of the Indian votes in the 99 election. So the political landscape, the environment is very different. But the history that we had working with Mr. Rambuka and he trusting the NFP and working with the then leader to create this world-acclaimed 1997 Constitution remains a legacy of both those two gentlemen. And if people want to see it that way, that I'm continuing with the legacy of Jairam Reddy, that's fine. But this alliance, as we all know, I am not looking at 1977. I know somebody talked about 1977. I was a little kid in 1977.
I'll come to that. I'll stop you there, if you don't mind.
But,
you're
sure,
running away with.
You're
running away. You're running away with things that I intend to ask you. Let's just confine ourselves to the questions. So we've discussed that legacy, and you're quite happy with that legacy that Mr. Jairam Reddy and Mr. Rambuka forged, and you're continuing that legacy for the National Federation Party. Now, you've praised Mr. Rambuka in abundance at practically all your meetings and rallies, And a viewer asks this question: does Mr. Rambuka reciprocate in kind when it comes to Professor Biman Prasad?
Well, maybe you should ask Mr. Rambuka about that. But Mr. Rambuka has made it very clear in statements, and he has invoked his legacy many times working with Mr. Jairam Reddy. He has given anecdotes of how he trusted the National Federation Party at that time and how he trusts the National Federation Party of now and my leadership to take the country forward. And so we that's all I can say, Sashi. But
Okay.
you can ask him when you interview him what he
I
thinks
will
about
indeed ask him that. Now, given that there will be an alliance post-election between your two parties, how important is it to campaign on party lines and on party issues?
Shashi, one thing that people have to understand very clearly that the electoral system, the current electoral system, doesn't allow a pre-election coalition. There are no constituencies. You can't share seats. The only way you can do is form one party and just have 55 people. What the People's Alliance in the NFP Memorandum of Understanding is a post-election understanding and agreement. What we will do before the election is we will put 55 seats, 55 candidates. We will fight for every vote. So will the People's Alliance. They will put 55 candidates. They will fight for every vote. And it's only after the election, whatever seats each party gets, combined will form the government. And in our agreement, we have also said very clearly that, and I'll read this, we may amend this MOU to meet necessary circumstances or to include other parties who share the values and wish to join them. Amendments must be endorsed by each party's government. So even the post-election MOU hasn't closed the doors on other opposition political parties to join us in
All
government.
right. I'm going to come to that shortly. Now, what are the core differences in both parties, and how will you reconcile that in an alliance post-election?
Well, Sachi, I can tell you that we already have a technical committee which includes representatives of both parties, and they work on a number of policy areas and issues, and like any coalition government anywhere. There will be differences in policies. There will be room for negotiating policies. But as you see in terms of our MOU, we have a broad, common vision of what the government, the People's Alliance and NFP government will look like. What would be the underlying, principles on which that government will be run. These are all very, very clearly included in the agreement that we have signed. And it's a public document, and people can read that and understand the basis on which a post-election People's Alliance and NFP government will be formed.
Does that document appear on the NFP site, webpage?
It's on the NFP website. It's on the NFP Facebook, and I can send you a copy, Sashi, if you're interested in it.
I've got a media copy of it, but if you send a formal copy, I'll certainly go through that again. Now, again, your political opponents are using the no kusta speech to attack you. For example, during his recent appearance on SSTP, Mr. Mahendra Chaudhry referred to this very same thing, that having once spoken about not supporting coup makers, you've now gone opposite. In response to Mr. Chaudhry's comment, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, we are very clear The National Federation Party is probably the only party which has never supported a coup. And we have condemned all coups, whether it is 87 coup, whether it was 2000 coup, whether it was 2006 coup. And that position has not changed. It will not change ever. Mr. Chaudhry obviously has conveniently forgotten what happened in 2006. If he should be able to look himself in the mirror and say whether he was in a position in 2006 to stop another coup in this country. And I can reveal this, Shashi, that before the 2006 coup, on 21st November, myself and Dr. Mahen Reddy, we signed a letter. We went to see Mr. Chaudhry because everybody was talking about a coup. Bainimarama had already threatened the SDL government, the coalition government, which had 9 Labour Party people. And we asked him to come out openly and condemn the threats and the impending coup. And we had articulated all that in that letter that is in public. I can send you that letter sometime later. But the point is that we have a history of working with Mr. Rambuka. And Mr. Rambuka, as I said earlier, was made Prime Minister by Mr. Chaudhry and his Labour Party in 1992. So then we have a history of working with Mr. Rambuka from 94 and getting the 97 constitution, under which every political party fought the election in 99, and Mr. Chaudhry became Prime Minister. So it is ironical for somebody like Mr. Chaudhry to come out and say that, we are working with Mr. Rambuka, and that, somehow, we are not, we're going back on our words. He forgets he was part of the party in parliament which was working on the constitution. Krishna Dutt from the Labour Party then was on the Constitutional Review Committee. But more importantly, Shashi, Mr. Chaudhry joined Bainimarama in his interim cabinet as finance minister and was there for 2 years until he got booted out. And,
right.
and so he needs to explain to the people of this country before accusing me or the NFP of having a different position as to why he did not come out clearly in 2006 and condemn the 2006 coup. And there are people in the Labour Party like Krishna Dutt, who was a main minister. He was a key fellow. These people are no longer with Mr. Chaudhry, and they know what happened in 2006. So, Shashi, I'm not looking at 1977. I'm not forgetting 1987. I was around. I'm not forgetting 2000. I'm not forgetting 2006. But I'm also looking to the future. I'm looking ahead.
All right. You've mentioned
no matter what, I just want to
Go
say that I don't want to go back to the past. I'm not forgetting the past, but I'm looking to the future. And the People's Alliance in the NFP is about the future. Others can go back. That's their choice.
All right. Just before we go to the future or the present, you've mentioned 1977 once or twice already on your own volition. Now, in a speech in Saru Lotoka just this week, Mr. Chaudhry, in fact, attacked the Fiji First Party, attacked the achievement or lack thereof of the Rambuka government between 92 and 99, and went way back in time to 1977 to attack the National Federation Party, saying it could not form government because it continued to bicker amongst itself. How do you respond to a comment of that sort?
Well, all I want to say, Sashi, is I was a little boy in 1977, and I have later on, read the history of what happened, and that was 45 years ago. So if Mr. Chaudhary wants to go back 45 years ago and talk about the current NFP leader or leadership, then that's his choice. But he should move forward a little bit, talk about 1992, talk about what happened in 2000, who was the commander of the military forces, how he was removed, and why did he join the same man in 2006 and set in train another years of misery in this country as a result of the 2006 coup, which we are now all seeing in front of us.
Let me say, I think the way the country stands right now, it doesn't need politicians in the opposition to move backwards. There has to be a common purpose in mind. There has to be a common focus to move forward, to try and bring a change in the country for the betterment of the people of Fiji. Having said that, if would you be prepared to leave all things in the past and move forward? In other words, you mentioned your memorandum of understanding that there is still room for parties to join. Would you be willing to extend a hand to, say, the Fiji Labour Party to join your cause?
The agreement, Sashi, is very clear. As I read to you earlier, it is open. It says very clearly that we are happy to amend the MOU if other parties who support our vision, who support our values, are prepared to join us. So yes, I mean the invitation is there in the MOU itself, because we believe, and the reason why we've done that is because we believe in working together. We believe in the future. We believe that we should not forget the past. Nobody should forget the past, but we should also be looking to the future and not be tied to the past in a way that we can't move to the future and create a country where we are not going to see those past ever again, but a future which will be bright for our people. That's what this MOU is all about. This is what this partnership is about, and I'm focused on it. And I think the people are appreciating this effort, and they can see a very, very clear choice as opposed to the two-man government that we have now, and what the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party are offering through this partnership in a post-election government.
I'll come back to the your People's Alliance and NFP Alliance itself in a little while. Have a break.
Sure.
You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends. If you can, don't forget to like and share the SSTP page as well. Dr. Biman, let's now turn our attention to media in Fiji. Do you think that responsible journalism is being practiced in Fiji? As an example, Graham Davis, in his Grubsheet blog recently, broke the story that the Fiji Sun manipulated the Western Force Fiji Sun polls to distort the figures in favor of the Prime Minister. Your comments?
That's a very, very serious allegation, Sashi, and that tantamounts to corruption. If you may like to put it that way. And so, yes, I mean, that's a very, very serious allegation. And, I don't expect the media industry authority to investigate because it involves a government mouthpiece. The allegation is against a government mouthpiece. And so I don't expect much, but indeed, it's a very, very serious allegation and one that needs to be investigated whenever, by whoever should be responsible right now.
Which brings me to the point, if there is a change of government and say if you together with other alliances form government, would the new government be calling for a commission of inquiry into so many different facets of governance in Fiji? For example, inquiry into the media industry.
Well, first of all, Sashi, one thing I can say with certainty, that all of us in the opposition know the draconian media decree and why it was imposed on the people of this country and on the media in 2010. That was by the military government. They wanted to suppress the media. They wanted to suppress freedom of association, freedom of speech. And that decree, as I said to you earlier, Sashi, all the decrees, all the draconian decrees that were put in place by the military government got preserved into the 2013 constitution. And the media decree is, or now act, is a draconian piece of legislation. It basically is a sword hanging onto the media organizations, editors and publishers, and therefore those who are not in the government's pocket, those media organizations, those who are independent, they have to watch their back all the time. They have to hold back. They have to self-censor. They have to check the legality of every story or every angle that they put in on news.
But the question, the question is, if you were part of a new government, would the new government get commission of inquiries into many facets of governance, including the media?
First of all, we will get rid of the media decree, all the draconian provisions. With respect to inquiries, with respect to what has happened in other facets of governance, that is something that the incoming government and the process itself. I mean, if there are if the laws have been broken, the laws that this government has put in place, then it will be incumbent upon the next government to look at those, whether through an inquiry, whether through a legal processes that exist. That's a matter that will have to be seriously considered.
It's good to know that there are thoughts of moving, or rather getting rid of draconian media laws. Now, you will probably agree with me that there's hardly any investigative journalism in Fiji these days. Do you think there is fear in journalists and a degree of apprehension in journalism generally in Fiji? I think you touched a little on that a little while ago.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Sashi. It's very clear, as I said earlier, that there is a lot of self-censorship, not only from the journalists themselves. In fact, in the Media Act was changed slightly. The fines and jail terms for the journalists was removed, but the other penalties on the editors, on the publishers, remain, as part of the law. And so I think the law itself is stifling, and it leads to that kind of environment that you talked about, that nobody is interested in asking hard questions to the government. In fact, those media organizations sympathetic to the government, in fact, those who are the mouthpieces, they always put the opposition on the chopping block instead of asking the hard questions to the government. So you're right, the investigative journalism, I mean, there are a lot of issues out there that needs investigation, that needs reporting. Because of the law, because of the media environment, because of the draconian penalties, not only as part of the media law, but also under Crimes Act. There are serious penalties, and so these people who are in the media industry are always worried, and therefore the natural thing is to hold back. And you're absolutely right, Shashi. That's the environment in which our journalists, and many of them are very good people. They're trying their best. Even in the government mouthpiece organizations, there are journalists who are doing very well. Who want to do that, but they can't.
All right, now, how does the current media laws affect opposition parties? There seems to be a constant attack by the Fiji First Party on the Fiji Times and the Fiji Village, for instance.
Well, the Fiji First government and Mr. Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, they want all the media organizations to report and be with them. In other words, if they report criticisms of the government, then they are not good. So basically, the relentless attack by Mr. Qayyum and other ministers in Parliament on the Fiji Times and Communications Fiji Limited and Fiji Village it shows their desperation, shows that they do not like criticism of the government, of their policies, of what the opposition politicians are saying about them. And that's precisely what they've done. And for the opposition parties, it's very difficult, because when the government mouthpieces, and the organization that I'm talking about, we have very little recourse to protest at the biased, slanted, cooked up, stories about the opposition and the coverage that we get. I mean, you would expect the state broadcaster, funded by the taxpayers, to be an unbiased, independent, radio and television station, but we don't feel that they are, and so some of us, do not talk to them.
All right, you mentioned the state broadcaster. It has been observed in some quarters that the FBC only talks about the 1987 coup, that is the coup carried out by Sitiveni Rambuka. However, FBC does not talk about the 2000 or the 2006 coup. What do you think is the reason for this self-censorship when it comes to these two coups, 2000 and 2006 coup? Do you think this is selective journalism?
It absolutely is, Shashi. I mean, the motivation for the FBC and Fiji Sun not to talk about the 2000 and the 2006 coup is because then they have to talk about the current Prime Minister, because he was the coup leader in 2006. Obviously, there are other people, who are only talking about 1987. And attacking Rambuka, the People's Alliance and the NFP, but they are not talking about the 2006 coup. And it seems to me that they have a convergence because there is a motivation to do that. But unfortunately for them, the people can see through it, and the people are not going to be fooled by that kind of propaganda that you can say that 87 coup was bad and that 2000 and 2006 coup was was good. In fact, Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, is reported to be saying that somehow the 2006 coup was a good coup and the 87 coup was a bad coup. I mean, that kind of mentality is not going to take us forward. We are very clear that none of the coups in this country have done anything good for this country. They should have never been conducted. But this is an opportunity for us to look forward and as I said, create a political environment that we'll never see another coup in this country.
All right, we seem to be having some internet issues. Your voice is getting slightly distorted, and I hope you got frozen for a while, screen freeze. I hope things are back to normal. Let's move our subject to regionalism and the University of the South Pacific. That's what I want to discuss next, particularly the very unfortunate government action taken against the Vice Chancellor of the USP, Professor Paul Ahluwalia. What are your views about the deportation of the USP Vice Chancellor?
That is going to remain a blight on this nation and on the leadership of this country, which allowed that Gestapo type, deportation of the Vice Chancellor of the University of the South Pacific, Professor Paul Ahluwalia. It was a direct assault on the fundamental principles of a university, which includes academic freedom, attack on the human right and the democratic right of an individual who was hired by the region to run a regional organization. Now, this government has not given any reason, apart from some airy-fairy reason that there was some kind of political interference. They have not given any reason why he was deported in that particular way at midnight. I mean, if this government had any decency, if they didn't like the man, if they didn't like, what he was doing as the Vice Chancellor of the University of the South Pacific, they could have done it in a decent way. They could have asked him to explain. They could have said, okay, we don't want you. We are canceling your work permit. You have 5 days to leave the country. But to go in the night with a group of people, middle of the night, in a Gestapo style, operation, whisk him to the airport, put him on the next flight to Australia, was a very, very sad thing that, and we should be ashamed, as a country, we should be ashamed of ourselves that we have a government, we had a Prime Minister and the Attorney General who allowed that to happen. And I think that Sashi started the cracks in the unity of the region, because USP is one regional institution which is a good example of a success story. USP's presence in all the regional countries is something that the people in those countries can see. And every government in this country, since the establishment of the University of the South Pacific in 1968, respected the governance structure of the university, which was the University Council, which included ministers from the region, representatives from Australia and New Zealand government. Any decision that that council made was respected. And this government defied all that. And just like they were forcing things here in domestically, they tried to force the University of the South Pacific Council to do what they wanted to do. Unfortunately for the region, the council took a very, very strong stand and kept the Vice Chancellor.
So what impact did the deportation have on Fiji? You talk about the regional area and Palalawalia's deportation. What kind of impact does it have on Fiji in the region?
Well, Fiji has lost their reputation. No matter how much Mr. Baini Marama and his government can say that they are the leaders in the Pacific. I mean, you get to chair the forum meeting because it's on a rotational basis. It's not because everybody in the region suddenly likes Fiji and therefore Mr. Baini Marama is going to chair the forum meeting. It's a rotation. He's going to chair it, but look at the regional disunity that was created not only as a result of what happened to the vice chancellor at USP, but also how Fiji conducted itself in terms of nominating its candidate for the secretary general position and so on. So the Micronesians, while they have now come out and said that they really like the unity, they've actually worked out a strategy to do that. And here, if you read the story in the Samoa Observer, the role of Prime Minister Fiame Mataafa, I think for once she has provided the leadership. And from what I read and what I see, I think if she was not leading this effort to bring or to keep the Micronesian countries within the forum, Fiji's reputation would be further eroded, and it's going to look very bad.
All right. Now, the Prime Minister has allegedly stated that students at USP are studying in a corrupt environment. What does he mean, and what are your views in relation to his statement?
Well, Mr. Baini Marama should go and tell those more than 2,000 students who graduated recently, of which 60% of them were women, that they got their degrees, certificates, diplomas, masters, and PhDs from a corrupt environment. In fact, it's an insult to the hard-working students, lecturers, professors, their parents, to be told that their children or their students or your professors were working in a corrupt environment, and the product that you've got, which is your degree, certificates, and diplomas, comes out of a corrupt environment. It is unbecoming of a prime minister of a country which hosts a regional institution of repute to make this kind of flippant, uncalled for, and stupid statement about students studying in a corrupt environment.
Let me ask you, if you were part of a new government, would you like to see the Vice Chancellor of the University of the South Pacific, Professor Palalawalia, return to Fiji to do his work from Suva?
We will respect the decision of the governing body of the University of the South Pacific, which is the council. If the council decides tomorrow, or if the council decides when we are in government that Professor Alwalia and the Vice Chancellor of the University of the South Pacific should be based in Fiji, then he will be based in Fiji.
Okay.
And that's what we will respect. We will respect the governance structure of the University of the South Pacific, which this government did not respect.
All right. Professor Biman, we've been going for just over 3 hours, and I have quite a lot of things to discuss with you. I don't know whether we can do it as a quick fire question. I don't know how you are planned for next Sunday. Would you like to continue, or would you like to come back next Sunday? 3 hours is a long time.
Well, it's entirely up to you, Sashi. I'm happy to come back again on Sunday if you want, but or you can invite me another time and we continue with some of those questions.
All right. Well, look, let me just talk to my production team. But are you free next Sunday?
I'll have to check what's my schedule on Sunday. Can I get back to you maybe tomorrow?
Okay, but let's just continue in the meanwhile. Let's try and do some quick fire questions and answers. And if you feel that there is a question that needs to be gone into detail, by all means, we can discuss that. Talk to you now about the government's propaganda machine. Corvus is a PR company contracted to the government to provide PR spin, whatever. My question is the engagement of an overseas PR spin team a necessity for the Fiji government?
Absolutely not. We have said that before, and when we come into government, we will not be engaging these expensive, foreign PR firms to mount a propaganda, for the government. We will use our local resources.
All right. Now, so in other words, you will ensure that COVIS does not sort of remain in charge of government PR machinery.
There are many people out there, Fiji citizens who may be in Fiji right now, who are maybe outside of Fiji, many journalists, experienced people that we can always call upon to help the government in its PR if it is necessary. But we believe that this government has been engaging in very expensive extravagance in hiring, foreign PR firms and unnecessarily wasting a lot of money on propaganda.
Now, it has been widely documented, and sources reveal that the government has also set up VATIS, which is mostly government endorsed trolls who target any opposition to government in all facets of life. My question to you is VATIS a necessity or an unnecessary scourge of taxpayers' money?
Well, if the government, I don't know how much the government is paying them or what sort of contract they have. I'm not privy to that, Sachi, but yes, I mean, it's a wastage that we can do without.
Well answered. What do you think is the role of media and social media platforms to hold truth to power?
I think social media platforms are very, very important. Of course, people feel very empowered on social media to raise their concerns. There is always this ability to create, news, sometimes fake. Politicians have to get used to it. But there is, despite all that, there is a good role for social media, especially in an environment where the mainstream media is restricted or is constrained, by draconian laws such as the one that we have in this country. And so the social media platforms become a very reliable and easy means of sharing information, asking questions, and holding, the powers that be to account. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't have any particular, concerns. Sometimes, people get very excited by the attack, from fake accounts. But that's the nature of the social media. And but other than that, there is a lot of useful information, communication that can be got from the social media. And throughout the world, political parties use that. Governments are using social media platforms to disseminate information. Sometimes the propaganda. We have a government here in Fiji, which uses the government page to attack opposition politicians, paid for by the taxpayers. That's not
All right. Right. I mean, I've just had a look at what's remaining. It will make another good program. Uh, with all due respect to you, Professor Biman, I'd like to say let us stop this program for now, for today. I think we've already gone over 3 hours. And as you know, absorbing things like this requires a lot of patience. And I've seen some comments from some of my viewers. They're all pleading for more next week from you. So if you are available, I will shift my chief guest from next week to the following week with his permission. And we will certainly love to entertain you because I have some very important facets to discuss with you regarding the future, regarding plans of the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party, and a number of other things. So, with your permission, I would like to say thank you very much for today. And I would request if your office can come back to me ASAP regarding your availability. It won't be as long as 3 hours, I can assure you that.
We'll do that, Shashi, and thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you, even though it was long.
Well, it is long. That's why I want to continue this next week, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as chief guest. We've discussed some contentious issues, and there's some other very important issues to discuss for the future of Fiji. So I thank you very much and say goodbye to you for now, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Well, folks, as I said, I would have enjoyed talking to the good professor, but time is moving on, and I'm very mindful of how much one can absorb. So, thank you once again to Professor Biman Prasad for joining me this Sunday. Now, again, for the record, let me once again tell people, our viewers, who constantly ask me or send me messages to interview the Attorney General, let me tell you that SSTP has extended invitations to the Attorney General as well as to the Prime Minister of Fiji, and I have not had the courtesy of a reply to date. As I said last week, you, the viewers, are astute, mentally sharp, and clever to figure out the reasons as to why there is a total no-show by the Fiji First government and its representatives on this SSTP program. I guess one needs to have the intestinal fortitude to appear on a platform like SSTP, and most importantly, to come with open and clean hands to face the brunt of questions on matters that affect all Fijians. Ultimately, the choice is theirs, and as I said last week again, not going to hold my breath for any one person or any one political party. I have better things to do. This is election year, and SSTP will give airspace to all political parties that are willing to participate in my program. That is the fact of the matter as far as I'm concerned. I thank you, all our viewers today, who've taken your precious time to be with us. Those contributing by comments, thank you very much for that as well. SSTP, where we ask questions that all Fijians all over the world want answers to. Fijians want to know. That's all for episode 23 this week. Now, I'd like to thank my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input in the program today. To my SSTP team, as always, a very big thank you to you. And regarding our chief guest for next week, I know that our chief guest is watching this afternoon. Good sir, I will let you know tomorrow as to how things pan out. We may just have to shift, with your permission, for you to go to the following week. We'll wait to see what Professor Biman Prasad tells me either this evening or tomorrow regarding his availability next Sunday. So keep watching the SSTP page. We will put the banners out ASAP. So don't forget, we'll meet you next Sunday at 11 a.m. Sydney time, 1 p.m. in Fiji and in New Zealand, 6 p.m. On Saturday in Los Angeles and San Francisco, when our chief guest will be Who knows? We'll let you know. And please follow and like the SSTP page so that you can get instant notifications. And in closing, I'll leave you with this quote: better to die fighting for freedom than be a prisoner all the days of your life. Quote, better to die fighting for freedom than be a prisoner all the days of your life. That quote from reggae guru Bob Marley. Well, that's it for episode 23 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. I am Sashi Singh, bidding you goodbye, namaste, and ni samode. Good night, good evening, and goodbye, world.